Okay, I'm checking to see if it's coming up. Nope. Show captions. There we go. Okay, I think you can see my captions to my commentary on which will be a quick video of the three that I've done. I think this is probably the quickest, which isn't to say that it's not a very important chapter, as a matter of fact, because it has so much to do with the previous video that I have yet to post, but will go up inside of the next hour concerning your last assignment, which is to propose a new policy to us as prospective board members and district people. And so you'll see that some of the questions from the syllabus for that particular assignment, which is again in the assignment, work perfectly with this particular chapter. And I know I applauded Joseph in the last video for having pointed out that some parts of this book could use some updating, but this particular chapter, I think, which is chapter 11, and again, I don't like to teach from a text all that much, is a quality chapter. So I just want to speak to the focus areas quickly, and if I think there's a need to come back and more specifically talk about aspects of this, I would certainly do that over the next couple of days rather than overload you with 10,000 videos, which I've been known to do. And so first, let's take a look at the chapter, rather the discussion question. I don't ordinarily do this either, but I thought it was a good topic to work from, and I also added a little wrinkle to it, if you'll notice on how I wrote the discussion question up. So the case study is called A Laughable Evaluation, so we can get an idea where this is coming from. And purportedly, we're talking about a school district named Spruce Valley District that's got budget problems, and how as they move forward to try to consider things about like bullying and so forth, he begins to make a series of mistakes, actually, where we would think, especially insofar as we talk about the Joint Committee on Program Evaluation Standards, which you will find on pages 282 and following. And so I don't think it's rocket science, I should say. I don't think it's rocket science to be able to evaluate anything. If you sit back and just think about objective ways to assess the value of anything at all, whether it be policy conversations or, again, who's got a better baseball team. For some reason, I'm into baseball today. At any rate, so you need to take a look at that, and that'll give you some key points to work from. And then I went on to ask whether or how that chapter and that case study, CUEU, to connect some of the other issues and concepts we've been trying to pound home throughout the course as such. So that's the topic. But the rest of the chapter actually, I think, does some nice things, but things we've also spoken about very briefly in some of the other premises. And that would be, I'm going to skip first one because that's just too obvious. But the second focus question they point out is, how can one tell if a proposed or completed evaluation of high quality? Well, the answer to that. The answer is that it meets all of the criteria of a good evaluation process, as shown in this text, but also shown maybe even more clearly by the assignment that you're responsible for April 18th. So that's the answer to that. I made the point last time through, but I want to repeat it again. I also made the same point in a lot of your discussion question pieces from 2 weeks ago, which is, why are evaluations always political? They are. There is no way around this. And I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating. When a leader, especially, or an educator says, well, I'm not political, that means they're probably not very effective. I know that rubs people the wrong way sometimes, but it's just part of what this is about. You have to remember that education and leadership are what I call ologies, Ologies. And ologies are part of what we call the social sciences. And so an excellent educational leader is a psychologist, okay, is an economist, is a sociologist, maybe above everything else. Before they're educators, is that they are sociologists. And you can add to that the premise of a political scientist as well. You recall that we spoke about Bowman and Deal several times now, and we pointed out that Bowman and Deal both recognize four frames, four mindsets, paradigms, whatever word that you want to use, that typify any organization, not just school organizations, but also working from the other side of the telescope. Schools are organizations. And so yeah, one always has to recognize that those four frames are in operation situationally as well as uh, constantly, depending on how the culture of that building or that district has been established and has been sustained, for better or for worse. And political is one part of that. And to come back to the video I also will have posted today, which speaks about Wohlstetter and high engagement, and completes with a description of how to use a cross-impact futuring matrix or chart to recognize the agendas and responses that will come up anytime possible futures or probable futures are being considered for any kind of futures-based change. And so you have to always consider, who's going to be for X or for Y. One quick war story, and I know that I've shared it before, is when I took over a policy formulation committee to redraw a transportation policy that we had on the books that required that we flip the transportation times between the early elementary schools and the late elementary schools every so often. And the superintendent, being a very sharp guy, recognized that that policy had not been observed in the slightest for years and years and years. And so when he realized that, he also recognized the need to address it. And he also needed, quite frankly, politically needed to make sure that that was being reassessed, because board members when board members are out to get a superintendent, that's a classic way to get them by saying, oh, well, you didn't follow policy number 616 that no one has remembered for the last 616 years. So my boss at the time, being a rather shrewd person, recognized the need to go on the books for having looked at that. So here I am running a committee about busing, and why I took it over is another conversation. And quite frankly, what I did was I pulled them through the entire futuring process that you've only seen a little smattering of. In the end, what happened was, and I'm proud to say this, well, first of all, I'll say that I didn't expect a response from certain parts of the community. I don't think any of us did. Religious education groups, the what do you call that? The Kung Fu chapter, no, the martial arts schools, the Little League, things like that, all got very involved with the fact that the busing times were going to flip for schools, and even some of the local stores. So people were coming to these meetings who I don't think any of us expected necessarily to show up and voice their concern. And they were all fine. I mean, they weren't looking just to cause problems for problems' sake. They had their own agendas, and they wanted to see how we could work this all out. And one thing I did, and I'm not claiming to be, the greatest politician in the world, but I certainly have some strengths here and there on some of it. And I basically kept pointing out the purpose of the committee was to meet the needs of all stakeholders as often as possible, all the time. And so that was going to mean that school XYZ parents, might in fact have to uh, see the need for a change for the good of the whole with a W. And that was kind of shocking in a certain sense because that district was not used to that kind of conversation. And lo and behold, when we got to the end, when we had to vote on a very carefully worded policy revision, right? It was a vote, and the vote came down to it was going to be either be a split or it was going to be one vote one way, no, and one vote in another way, yes. And by heavens, a parent from an elementary school that did not want to change, the busing rules, voted in favor of it. And people kind of looked at her, and I didn't even know who she was. Usually, I have a pretty good handle on who the people are going to say what. And she stood up and said, "Well, what Dr. B said has to be considered." And he said, "We're talking about flipping the policy, the time changes equitably every couple of years. I don't see how that hurts anyone. I think it's in the best interest of everybody." And the policy went through. My superintendent was shocked, to say the least. Although we did not expect their initial response. One man was so twisted at it. I'm not even to this day sure what his agenda was. He wrote a letter to the commissioner complaining about the way we ran these committees, and I had minutes for everything anybody said at any time across 6 or 7 rather lengthy meetings, and all I did was send the commissioner's office the minutes of the meetings and then the agendas and how we got to the last place, and the commissioner, not the commissioner himself, but someone wrote back and said, you know, the person's objection is denied, and we'll leave it at that. And so yes, you have to recognize the political premises. It can be something, and I know, like for example, the issue of some of you offered up some very good policies about so-called objectionable materials, or choices of books and these kinds of things, which became a very difficult topic in this very contentious world that we're living in lately. And they had some very solid, I forget, might have been Rockville Center, a very interesting, thoughtful policy that came all the way through that would have answered any of the political agendas too, if they're fairly considering what the board's trying to get done. So that's an important piece. And the last piece we talked about quite a few times already. How do you facilitate the evaluation process? First of all, you get the process written up. All right. That sounds a little hard-nosed, but the process has to be written up. And that's what I kept mentioning. And when you look at the policy handbook, you're going to see guidelines and procedures or some word that sounds like that. This is how you do it. And you really can't deviate from that too much without being putting the policy and yourself in jeopardy as such. But for the good of the kids and of the stakeholders who serve those kids, those are the kinds of legislation, as I think Eric had pointed out, those are the kinds of legislation that has to be in place to be considered in order for the policy to be put through. Now, if you're smart, he shook his finger. We'll talk more about this, I guess, up the road. And not every district does this. You build in a formative, evaluative, I can't say that word. You build in a formative assessment process along the way of the implementation. In other words, you don't wait for the end of the process having been put in place. And even if you have the process put in place and it's been accepted by everybody, you return to it on a regular basis throughout the meetings that the board will have with the superintendent. She may go through it from page 1 to page 717. She may pick out the ones that the board has prioritized. She may seek input from the stakeholders in other ways, but she's always looking at the policies and say, how's this policy working? Tell me what you think. And what that does politically, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to manipulate anything, but what that sounds politically is one sends the message to the community that you're keeping a transparent, evaluative process in place, and you're not afraid to say something has to be changed. Because in fact, things, by any number of reasons, need to be changed. And so that particular chapter is a good chapter. I think that the discussion question helps you do begin to work on the April 18th assignment. And even though this is not part of this conversation, is not supposed to be about the assignment that I talked about in the previous video, I would say too that you should send me what you're thinking about working on. You should send me a draft of what you think your problem statement is, sooner rather than later. But I think this particular chapter is of great value to you insofar as trying to pull together your presentation. I'll be talking more about this as we move along. Have the best rest of the week, and I'm around if you need me.